Here is the truth that nobody in a suit wants you to hear. The average American is exactly 3 missed grocery deliveries away from genuine desperation. 3 days without a running tap, and people start making decisions they cannot walk back. 3 weeks without the grid, and everything your great-great-grandmother knew by the age of 12 becomes the most valuable knowledge on Earth. The pioneers did not have a backup plan. They did not have a FEMA hotline or a 2-day shipping window. What they had were habits, specific, repeatable, life-or-death habits drilled into every man, woman, and child from the moment they were old enough to hold a tool. Habits that turned hostile land into thriving homesteads, that kept families fed through blizzards and droughts, that made something from nothing with a consistency modern people cannot imagine. FEMA recommends 3 days of emergency supplies. The pioneers would have laughed until they cried, because what kept them alive was not a stockpile. It was a set of ingrained skills so deep they did not even think of them as survival. They were just Tuesday. Number 20 on our list will seem obvious until you realize you have never actually done it. And number 7 will make you look at every wild plant you have ever ignored in an entirely different way. Before we get there, hit subscribe, because what you are about to learn is not nostalgia. It is a life insurance policy that costs you nothing but attention. Let us count down the 20 pioneer habits that would save your life if society collapsed tomorrow. Number 20, reading the sky like a newspaper. Pioneer families did not check weather apps. They watched cloud formations the way you scroll through headlines, constantly and methodically, drawing conclusions that meant the difference between a safe harvest and a ruined one. A ring around the moon meant rain within 24 hours. A red sky at morning sent fathers out to secure the barn before breakfast was finished. Mares tails, those high, wispy clouds that streak across a blue sky, told experienced eyes that a storm front would arrive in 2 days. This was not folklore. It was compressed meteorological observation passed down through generations of people whose crops, livestock, and lives depended on accurate prediction. Modern emergency managers who work disaster zones will tell you the same thing. When communications go down, the people who know how to read atmospheric pressure, changes through cloud behavior, and wind shifts are the ones who make the decisions that save groups. The habit is not difficult to build. It takes 3 minutes every morning to step outside, look up, and make a conscious prediction. Write it down. Check it against what actually happens. Within 6 months, your accuracy will be startling. Number 19, keeping a fire alive, not just starting one. Every child raised in a pioneer household understood fire maintenance before they understood long division. The morning task was not to start a fire. It was to revive the coals that had been banked the night before. Hardwood coals, packed tight under a layer of ash, could hold heat for 12 hours or more. A pioneer woman rising before dawn would find those coals with a poker, coax them back with breath and dry tinder, and have a cooking fire going before the household woke. This matters more than fire starting in a collapse scenario. Anyone with enough dry material and friction or a lighter can start a fire once. What drains people in genuine survival situations is the constant fuel consumption of a fire that dies every night. Keeping a sustained, managed flame going with minimal wood is a skill that requires understanding how coals work, how to build a fire for longevity rather than spectacle, and how to read the color and behavior of embers. Bright orange means still alive. Gray and cold means start over. The pioneers learned this at age 5. Salt, smoke, and cold running air. That was the pioneer's refrigerator, and it kept meat safe for months with no electricity and no plastic. Dry curing meat with salt was standard household knowledge. You rubbed cuts thoroughly with a mix of salt, sometimes sugar, and occasionally crushed black pepper. Pack them into barrels or crocks and let the salt draw out moisture over days. That drawn moisture, the liquid pooling in the crock, was called the pickle, and it worked as an additional preserving brine. Smoking added another layer. A proper smokehouse, even a rough one built from salvaged boards, would cold smoke cured hams and bacon for days over hickory or applewood chips. The smoke deposited antimicrobial compounds into the meat that extended shelf life far beyond what salt alone could manage. Families who both cured and smoked their pork were eating it 18 months later with no ill effects. In a grid-down scenario, a single hog, properly processed and preserved this way, could feed a family through winter. The habit to build now is learning to do it before you need it, because the technique requires practice to execute safely. Number 17, knowing exactly where water comes from and where it goes. Pioneer settlers did not pick a homestead location casually. The first question was always water. Is there a spring? Does the creek run year-round? Or does it dry up in August? Is the well site uphill from the outhouse? That last mistake got entire families killed when they had it wrong. Waterborne illness was the single greatest killer on the frontier. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery swept through settlements when people contaminated their water supply. The contamination almost always traced back to waste, being too close to the water source. Pioneers who survived learned to site wells uphill and upwind from latrines by at least 100 feet. They built spring houses, small stone structures over natural springs that kept water cold and shaded from algae growth. They boiled water for drinking when they had any doubt at all. The habit to build now is simple. Situational awareness. Know where your water comes from. Know what is upstream of it. Know how to purify water through boiling, and know that boiling for a full rolling minute kills virtually every pathogen that will hurt you. Number 16. Canning and root cellaring everything in season. Summer abundance meant nothing to a pioneer family unless it was captured. Canning was not a hobby, it was a survival obligation. From the first strawberries of June through the last winter squash of October, pioneer women processed food in an almost unbroken chain. Green beans went into jars, tomatoes were canned whole, corn was blanched and packed, fruit became preserves that sweetened an otherwise grim January table. The root cellar was equally critical. A properly built root cellar dug into a north-facing hillside with ventilation to keep temperature between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit could keep potatoes, carrots, turnips, beets, cabbages, and apples fresh for 6 months without a single calorie of electricity. The humidity was kept from dropping by storing the vegetables with damp sand. The cold was kept from warming by the thermal mass of the earth itself. This habit requires almost no grid infrastructure to practice. You can build a functional root cellar this weekend with a shovel, some lumber, and a hillside. You can start water bath canning high-acid foods with a pot large enough to submerge your jars. The knowledge is available. The reason to build the habit before you need it is that canning technique has a learning curve. The first few batches teach you more than any manual can. Number 15, rendering and storing animal fat. Before vegetable shortening, before cooking spray, before every supermarket shelf in America lined itself with seed oils that pioneers would not have recognized as food, there was lard, and there was tallow, and there was bear grease when a hunter got lucky. Pioneer kitchens kept ceramic crocks of rendered fat on a shelf the way modern kitchens keep olive oil on a counter. It was the cooking medium, the pastry fat, the lamp fuel, the wood conditioner, the leather waterproofer, and the wound salve all in one container. Rendering fat is straightforward. You cut fatty tissue into small pieces, melt it slowly over low heat, strain out the solids, and pour the liquid fat into sealed containers where it solidifies. Properly rendered lard stored in a cool, dark place keeps for a year without refrigeration. Tallow, rendered from beef or mutton fat, keeps even longer and burns clean enough in a simple wick lamp to provide useful light. A family that knows how to render and store animal fat has a cooking medium, a light source, and a topical skin protectant from a single farm animal. The pioneers wasted nothing, and fat was among the most valued substances on the homestead. Number 14. Building and reading a basic compass bearing. Here is a pattern break. The number of people who believe they could navigate without their phone but cannot actually do it is staggering. When the grid goes down, when cell towers go dark, when the GPS chip in your pocket becomes an expensive paperweight, the people who can take a reliable compass bearing and follow it over broken terrain have a capability that most of their neighbors simply do not possess. Pioneer travelers crossing unfamiliar country used the sun, the stars, and eventually the magnetic compass with a competence that came from necessity. They knew that the North Star sits directly above the celestial pole and can be found by tracing a line through the two outer stars of the Big Dipper Cup. They knew the sun rises slightly north of due east in summer and slightly south in winter. They used landmarks, ridge lines, creek drainages, and shadow direction to maintain orientation over days of travel. The habit is to navigate somewhere every week without your phone's help. Use a paper map and a compass. Know how to set a bearing and walk it. Know how to triangulate your position from two known landmarks. This is not an afternoon of reading. It is a repeatable physical practice that becomes reliable only through repetition. Number 13. Identifying at least 20 edible wild plants in your region. In the spring of 1847, emigrant parties crossing the Sierra Nevada survived or starved in part based on who among them knew what the land would give. The ones who knew to look for pine cambium, the soft inner bark just under the outer layer, for cattail pollen, for the protein-dense seeds of native grasses, outlasted those who waited for rescue with nothing. Pioneer families who settled alongside indigenous communities learned quickly. The land was not empty of food. It was full of food. Dandelion greens, watercress, wild garlic, wood sorrel, lamb's quarters, purslane, elderberries, wild plums, hickory nuts, black walnuts, cattail shoots, and dozens of regional equivalents were available to anyone with eyes trained to find them. The habit is to learn your local edible plants now, before desperation makes identification errors dangerous. Take a foraging walk with a qualified guide. Buy a regional field guide and use it. Learn the plants in your county that are both edible and abundant. 20 species is a realistic goal for a season of attention, and 20 species is enough to keep a person from starving in almost any American landscape. Number 12. Sharpening and maintaining every cutting tool you own. A dull blade is more dangerous than a sharp one. It requires more force, slips more easily, and does more tearing than cutting, which in a world without urgent care clinics is a serious problem. Pioneer households sharpened their knives, axes, hatchets, draw knives, and chisels with the same routine attention they gave to feeding the livestock. A sharp edge was not a luxury. It was a safety standard and a productivity multiplier. The tools for sharpening require almost no infrastructure. A whetstone or sharpening stone, a leather strop, and the knowledge of the correct angle for each blade type is all you need. A kitchen knife is sharpened to roughly 15 to 20 degrees per side. An axe is sharpened with a more convex bevel that handles impact without chipping. A draw knife used for shaping wood requires a different touch. The habit is to learn the correct sharpening angle for every cutting tool in your home and to maintain those edges on a regular schedule. Sharp tools make every other pioneer skill on this list significantly more achievable. Number 11. Sewing, mending, and making clothes from raw material. Here is another pattern break, because this one will surprise you with how critical it actually is. In a collapse scenario, clothing degradation is one of the first practical crises people do not anticipate. Shoes wear through, denim tears, wool frays. Without the ability to mend, patch, resole, and eventually fabricate basic textile items, a group of survivors faces exposure problems within months. Pioneer women could cut a shirt from whole cloth, turn a collar when it wore through on one side, mend a tear with a running stitch invisible from 3 feet, and re-sole a boot with salvaged leather. These were not decorative skills. They were infrastructure maintenance of the human body's protection system against cold, wet, and abrasion. The minimum viable version of this habit is learning to mend effectively. A good running stitch, a lock stitch for reinforcement, and the ability to patch denim with denim. Beyond that, learning to knit or crochet gives you the ability to produce warm garments from raw wool or reclaimed fiber. Beyond that, hand spinning and basic weaving take you all the way back to producing textile from the animal or the plant. Each layer of that skill is another year of thermal security your group has that others do not. Number 10. Making effective medicine from available plants. Willow bark contains salicin, which the body converts to salicylic acid, the active compound in aspirin. Pioneer families who knew to steep willow bark into a tea had a genuine analgesic and fever reducer available at any riverbank. Yarrow, which grows as a roadside weed across most of North America, stops bleeding when packed directly into a wound with pressure, and it has been used as a field hemostatic agent from antiquity through the Civil War. Elderberries have demonstrated antiviral properties in controlled studies. Plantain, the lawn weed almost everyone has pulled and discarded, draws splinters and reduces inflammation when chewed and applied as a poultice. This is not magical thinking. It is the accumulated pharmacological knowledge of people who lived before pharmaceutical companies existed and who needed real results from available materials. Pioneer families carried this knowledge the way modern people carry an insurance card. The habit is to learn the medicinal plants of your region with the same rigor you bring to edible plant identification. Understand preparation methods, which plants require heat to activate compounds, which should never be used internally, and which require precise dosage to avoid toxicity. This is serious knowledge that deserves serious study, but it is not arcane. It is pattern recognition and preparation. Number 9. Preserving seeds from every successful harvest. The seed packet you buy from a garden center is often a hybrid variety, which means the seeds it produces in the first generation will not reliably grow true the following year. Pioneer farmers understood this without knowing the genetic mechanics behind it. They saved seeds from their best specimens, the biggest tomatoes, the most productive corn ears, the beans that germinated fastest and set pods heaviest. They dried those seeds carefully, stored them in dry paper or cloth, and labeled them through winter for the next spring planting. This habit creates compounding advantage. The first year, you are growing seeds selected by a commercial operation for characteristics that may not match your climate. The second year, you are growing seeds selected by your own garden for what actually thrives in your soil and your weather. By the 5th year, you have a locally adapted variety that will outperform commercial seed in your specific conditions. In a collapse scenario, seeds are currency, medicine, and insurance simultaneously. A family that holds diverse, open-pollinated, locally adapted seeds holds something irreplaceable and something others will negotiate for. Sanitation failures kill faster than almost any other collapse scenario, and with far less drama than people imagine. It is not dramatic, it is waterborne illness from fecal contamination of water supplies, spreading from person to person through hand contact, cooking surfaces, and shared water. Pioneer settlements that survived their first winters understood this. The ones that did not left traces that archaeologists find as dense clusters of human pathogen markers around water sources. A proper field latrine is placed downhill and downwind from water sources and sleeping areas. It is at minimum 18 inches deep, with a cover or soil displaced nearby for use after each visit. It is relocated before it reaches 6 inches from the surface. Hand washing, even with just water and friction, dramatically reduces transmission. The habit here is knowing where you would put a sanitation system if your home's plumbing failed tonight. Know the distance requirements, know the depth requirements, know how to dig one efficiently. This is not a pleasant topic, which is exactly why most people have not thought about it, and exactly why it gives those who have thought about it such a significant advantage. Number 7, understanding how to read animals for weather and danger. Cattle that lie down in the morning before rain, birds that go silent before a predator passes through, squirrels caching 3 times their normal volume in early October, signaling a hard winter is coming. Pioneer farmers and hunters read animal behavior the way modern people read data dashboards. The scientific basis for this has been increasingly confirmed. Animals detect infrasound, barometric pressure changes, magnetic field fluctuations, and chemical signals at sensitivities that humans simply do not possess. When the birds go quiet, something large or threatening is near. When insects disappear before a storm, the pressure drop is coming faster than any visible cloud suggests. When domestic animals refuse to settle, they are detecting something outside the range of human perception. In a collapse scenario, this is a free, early warning system available to anyone willing to pay attention. Beyond weather and danger, pioneer hunters knew that animal behavior indicates available water, the presence of other food sources, seasonal movement patterns, and territorial boundaries. The habit is to start watching animal behavior with conscious attention and to start recording what behavior precedes what events. Within a year, the patterns become readable. Number 6, soap making from ash and animal fat. Here is the chemistry stripped to what matters. Wood, ash is alkaline, and animal fat is a triglyceride. When you leach water through wood ash, you get a weak potassium hydroxide solution, lye water. Combine that lye water with rendered animal fat and cook the mixture for hours. The fat molecules saponify. You get real, functional, antibacterial soap that pioneers made from nothing but fire, wood, water, and the rendered fat they were already storing for cooking. Pioneer women kept a barrel outside for ash collection all year, leached lye water from it each spring, and combined that lye with the previous year's accumulated fat scraps to produce the household soap supply for the next 12 months. The process takes patience and caution because lye water will burn skin, but it requires no purchased inputs beyond time and attention. Soap production in a collapse scenario is not a luxury. It is the hygiene infrastructure that separates a functioning group from an outbreak. Wound care, food preparation hygiene, and disease transmission reduction all depend on it. The pioneer who could make soap could trade soap. The habit to build now is to make at least one batch from scratch before you need the skill to keep people alive. Number 5, knowing how to build a shelter from available material in under 4 hours. The pioneers who survived their first nights in genuinely hostile conditions before permanent shelter existed were the ones who could read the landscape for natural shelter advantages and could improve those advantages quickly with available material. A deep-cut bank with an overhang, a fallen log that could anchor one side of a lean-to, a dense stand of young firs whose lower branches overlapped enough to shed rain. A functional lean-to can be constructed with nothing but a ridgepole lashed between 2 trees, angled support poles, and a layered thatch of large leaves, bark slabs, or pine boughs thick enough to shed water. The key word is thick. Most people building emergency shelter for the first time use 1/4 the thatch density required to actually repel rain. You need 8 to 12 inches of layered organic material before water stops penetrating. The habit to build is to practice this skill in low-stakes conditions. Go into a woodlot, bring nothing, and build a shelter you could actually sleep in, dry. Do it until you can do it confidently, because the cognitive load of learning in an emergency is enormous, and a skill practiced in comfort becomes automatic under stress. Number 4, preserving and using every part of every animal. The pioneers who survived on hunting and husbandry could not afford waste. A deer provided meat, obviously, but it also provided hide for moccasins and clothing, sinew for thread and bowstring, bone for needles and tool handles, marrow for calorie-dense fat, brain for hide tanning, antler for knife handles and pressure-flaking stone tools, and rendered fat for lamp fuel and skin conditioning. A single animal, fully processed, was a supply chain. Modern hunters who field dress and take the backstraps home are leaving an enormous percentage of a nutritional and material resource behind. The habit of full utilization is partly practical and partly philosophical. It requires knowing the techniques involved: hide tanning with brain or bark tannins, rendering marrow by cracking and boiling bones, making bone broth from the skeletal remains for mineral-dense liquid nutrition. It requires accepting that animal processing is time-consuming, not particularly clean, and enormously rewarding in terms of what it produces. In a collapse scenario, a family that knows how to fully utilize a single large animal has food, clothing material, cordage, and tool components from one successful hunt. That is a qualitatively different position than a family that takes the stakes and walks away. Number 3. Trading skills and goods rather than only money. Pioneer communities operated on barter economies with sophisticated, unwritten accounting. The blacksmith shod the farmer's horses in exchange for a portion of the grain harvest. The woman who kept bees traded honey for wool from the woman who kept sheep. The man skilled in log construction helped neighbors raise barns in exchange for reciprocal labor when his own buildings needed work. This was not informal or casual. It was a deeply functional economic system that operated on reputation, relationship, and the genuine value of irreplaceable skills. A person who could set a broken bone, who could shoe a horse, who could build a chimney that drew properly rather than filling the house with smoke, was wealthy in the only currency that mattered when metal money became useless. The habit to build now is developing a skill that produces genuine, practical value for others, and starting to operate in informal barter relationships before you need them. Barter networks that form after a collapse among strangers start from scratch with no established trust. Barter relationships that existed before a collapse with neighbors and community members already have the trust infrastructure in place. The pioneers knew everyone within 20 miles by name, by skill, and by reputation. That social capital was as important as any physical supply. Number 2, keeping an accurate inventory of everything you have and systematically rotating it. Pioneer households track their supplies with a level of precision that modern people usually apply only to financial accounts. The root cellar inventory in November told a farm family whether they had enough calories to reach the following harvest. If the answer was no, adjustments happened immediately. Reduced portions, additional hunting pressure, trade negotiations with neighbors, or hard decisions about which livestock could not be sustained through winter. The habit is simple and takes 20 minutes a week. Know what you have, know how much you have, know how quickly you consume it, know what date it expires or degrades past usefulness. Rotate new purchases behind older stock so that what you reach for first is always what is closest to expiration. This is called FIFO, first in, first out, and it is the inventory management principle that keeps pioneer pantries functional and modern preppers from discovering that their emergency food expired 3 years ago. In a collapse scenario, the family that knows precisely how many calories of food, how many gallons of water, how many candles, and how many matches they have on day 1 is in a categorically different position than the family guessing. Guessing leads to either premature panic or false confidence, and both produce bad decisions. Accurate inventory leads to accurate planning. Number 1, building genuine community before you need it. Every surviving pioneer settlement had something that individual family bunkers did not. They had other people with different skills, different knowledge bases, different physical capacities, and the social trust that comes from shared work and shared difficulty over time. The single habit that most predicts survival in any genuine social collapse scenario is not a stored supply, not a weapons cache, not a technical skill, though all of those matter. It is the depth and functionality of your relationships with the people around you. The pioneer communities that built American civilization did it collectively. Barn raisings were not charity. They were mutual insurance. The community that showed up to help you build your barn today was banking a claim on your labor when their roof collapsed next winter. Genuine community requires investment before it is needed. It requires showing up for neighbors when it costs you something. Sharing skills before sharing is critical. Build the social fabric of reciprocal obligation that makes collective action possible when individual action is insufficient. The pioneers knew this not as philosophy, but as practical necessity. A single family, no matter how skilled, cannot watch in all directions, cannot cover all the labor of survival, and cannot compensate for a single serious injury to a key member. The most important habit is the one that is hardest to practice in a culture that is optimized for isolation, independence, and self-sufficiency as terminal values rather than as means to a community end. Know your neighbors, know their skills, know what they need and what they can offer. Build those relationships now, in ordinary time, so that when extraordinary time arrives, you are not introducing yourself to the people whose cooperation determines your survival. These 20 habits were not emergency protocols for the pioneers. They were Tuesday. They were the ordinary texture of daily life in a world without backup systems. We lost most of them in 3 generations of infrastructure abundance, and the loss was so gradual that most people did not notice anything was gone. Now you know what is missing. The question is what you do with that knowledge. Pick one habit from this list and practice it this week, not all 20. 1. Because the pioneer approach to overwhelming challenge was never to panic at the scale of the problem. It was to do the next right thing with what you have, where you are. That was enough to build a continent. It will be enough for whatever comes next. Drop a comment telling me which habit you are starting with. And if you think number 6 or number 1 should have swapped places, make your case. I read every one.